The Desert Oasis by Bella Pages. In the heart of a vast desert, where sand stretched in every direction to meet the horizon, where the sun burned hot during the day and the stars shone brilliant at night, there existed a small oasis that seemed like a miracle in the midst of endless dryness. Water bubbled up from deep beneath the ground, creating a pool surrounded by date palms and desert willows, grasses and reeds, a pocket of green life in an ocean of gold and brown. At the edge of this oasis stood a simple adobe dwelling, its walls thick to keep out the heat, its small windows positioned to catch whatever breeze might stir the air. This was the home of a man named Hassan, who had come to the desert 7 years ago, seeking something he could only describe as truth, or perhaps clarity, or maybe just a way of living that felt authentic and real. Hassan had grown up in a coastal city, in a family of merchants who expected him to join their business, to marry well, to live the comfortable life they had built for themselves. He had tried to follow this path, had worked in his father's shop for several years, had become engaged to a woman his family approved of. But something in him had resisted, some part of his soul that yearned for a different kind of life, a different set of values. The breaking point had come on what should have been a happy occasion, his engagement party, surrounded by family and friends, everyone celebrating his future. Instead of feeling joy, Hassan had felt a deep sense of wrongness, a conviction that he was walking a path that was not his own. That night, unable to sleep, he had walked through the city streets until dawn, and by the time the sun rose, he had made his decision. Breaking the engagement had been painful. Leaving his family had been harder still. They had felt betrayed, had accused him of throwing away his life, of being selfish and foolish. And perhaps they were right, by their standards. But Hassan had known that he could not live for their expectations, that he needed to discover what his own life might be if he followed his own inner compass rather than external demands. He had traveled for 2 years, working odd jobs, sleeping in cheap rooms or sometimes under the stars, searching for something without knowing exactly what. He had visited mountains and forests, lakes and rivers, trying to find a place that spoke to him, that felt like home. And then, almost by accident, he had come to the desert. He had been passing through, traveling with a group of traders heading to a distant market. They had stopped at this oasis to rest and water their animals, and Hassan had walked away from the group to sit by the pool in the shade of the palms. The silence of the desert had struck him immediately, a quality of quiet unlike anything he had experienced before. And the light, the way it fell on the sand, the way it filtered through the palm fronds, the way it made everything seem both stark and beautiful, had touched something deep within him. He had stayed when the traders moved on. He had asked the few people who lived at the oasis if he could remain, if there was work he could do, a way he could be useful. They had been skeptical at first, this city boy who knew nothing of desert life, but they had let him stay and try. And slowly, painfully, making many mistakes, Hassan had learned the ways of the desert, had adapted to its demands, had found in its harshness a kind of purity he had been seeking without knowing it. Now, 7 years later, the desert was his home, and he could not imagine living anywhere else. He had built his small house with his own hands, mixing mud and straw, shaping bricks in wooden molds, laying them one by one, creating walls thick enough to withstand the desert's extremes. He had planted a small garden near the pool, growing vegetables and herbs that could tolerate the heat and the alkaline soil. He kept a few goats that provided milk and occasionally meat. He had learned to live simply, with few possessions, finding richness not in material things, but in the quality of each day, each moment. This evening, as the sun began to descend toward the western horizon, Hassan sat on the shaded side of his house, watching the light change on the dunes in the distance. The desert's colors were never static, never predictable. The sand appeared different at every hour, in every season, depending on the angle of light and the moisture in the air. Now, in late afternoon, the dunes glowed golden, their curves and valleys creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed almost alive. He had spent the day working in his garden, the labor made easier by doing it during the cooler morning hours, resting during the intense heat of midday, then returning to work as the afternoon temperatures became bearable. The garden required constant attention in the desert. Water had to be carefully managed, each plant receiving exactly what it needed and no more, the precious resource never wasted. Shade had to be provided for the more delicate vegetables. The soil had to be constantly enriched with compost and mulch to maintain its fertility. But Hassan did not resent this constant work. He had learned that caring for living things, for the garden and the goats and even the house itself, was not a burden but a practice, a way of staying grounded and present, a form of meditation. Each task had its own rhythm and requirements, and performing these tasks with attention and care brought a satisfaction that no passive entertainment ever had. The heat of the day was beginning to break now, the temperature dropping as the sun lowered. A slight breeze stirred, rustling the palm fronds above Hassan's head, carrying the scent of water and growing things. He closed his eyes and simply felt the breeze on his skin, heard the sound of the palms, breathed in the desert air. He had learned in the desert to pay attention to small pleasures, small moments of comfort or beauty. When every day was hot and dry, when resources were limited and life was demanding, you learned to appreciate what you had. A breeze on a still day, a cloud that brought shade, the taste of a date fresh from the tree, the sound of water moving in the irrigation channels. This attention to the present moment, this awareness of what was actually happening right now rather than what had happened or might happen, was perhaps the greatest gift the desert had given him. In his old life, he had always been elsewhere in his mind, replaying past conversations, planning future events, never quite present wherever he physically was. The desert did not allow that kind of distraction. It demanded attention, awareness, presence. Miss the signs of an approaching sandstorm, and you could die. Fail to notice that your water supply was running low, and you could find yourself in crisis. The desert required you to be here, now, fully engaged with reality. Hassan opened his eyes and watched as the sun touched the horizon, beginning its nightly descent. The sky took on deeper colors, orange fading to red, purple gathering at the zenith. The dunes became darker, their shadows lengthening, their contours more pronounced. This was Hassan's favorite time of day, this transition from the brightness and heat of day to the coolness and darkness of night. He rose and walked to the pool at the center of the oasis. The water was clear and still, reflecting the colored sky like a mirror. Date palms surrounded the pool, their trunks rough and scarred, their fronds spreading in green fountains overhead. These trees were ancient, some of them perhaps hundreds of years old, and they had witnessed countless sunsets, countless people coming to drink and rest at this water source. Hassan bent and cupped his hands in the pool, bringing the cool water to his face, washing away the day's dust and sweat. The water was sweet and pure, filtered through layers of rock as it rose from the deep aquifer beneath the desert. He drank deeply, feeling the coolness spread through his body, grateful for this resource that made life possible in this seemingly impossible place. He thought about water, about how it shaped everything in the desert. Where there was water, there was life. The oasis with its palms and gardens and animals. Where there was no water, there was only sand and rock and sky, beautiful but barren. Water determined where people could live, where they traveled, how they organized their days and years. It was the most precious substance, more valuable than gold or jewels because it made everything else possible. In his old life by the coast, Hassan had taken water for granted. It had been everywhere, abundant, almost too much of it. Rain fell regularly. The sea stretched to the horizon. Water came from taps without thought or effort. He had never considered its value, never appreciated what it meant to have it freely available. Here, he thought about water every day. He measured it, conserved it, made sure none was wasted. He understood intimately the cycle that brought it, rain falling in distant mountains, seeping down through rock, traveling underground for miles or years, finally emerging here at the oasis. This water he drank might have fallen as rain decades ago, might have traveled 100 miles beneath the desert to reach this spot. It connected him to distant places and times, made him part of a larger system. The sun had set now, and the light was fading quickly. In the desert, there was little twilight. Darkness came on rapidly once the sun disappeared. Hassan returned to his house and lit the oil lamps that provided his light. He had no electricity here at the oasis, no connection to any power grid. His life operated on older, simpler technologies: fire for cooking, oil lamps for light, muscle power for work. This simplicity had been difficult to adjust to at first. He had been accustomed to flipping switches and pushing buttons, to having every convenience immediately available. Learning to build fires, to maintain lamps, to do everything manually had required patience and persistence. But over time, he had come to prefer it. These simple technologies connected him more directly to the physical world, required him to pay attention and develop skills, gave him a sense of competence and self-reliance. He prepared his evening meal with the same care and attention he brought to all his tasks. He had learned to cook during his years here, having arrived knowing almost nothing about preparing food. Now he could make bread, cook rice and lentils, prepare vegetables in various ways, create meals that were simple but nourishing and satisfying. Tonight he made a stew with lentils and vegetables from his garden, flavored with herbs and spices. He cooked it slowly over a small fire, stirring occasionally, letting the flavors develop and meld. The process was meditative, requiring presence but not constant attention, allowing his mind to rest while his hands worked. While the stew cooked, Hassan sat by his door and watched the stars emerge. The desert sky at night was spectacular, with no light pollution to dim the stars' brilliance. The Milky Way stretched overhead in a river of light, and individual stars shone so brightly they seemed close enough to touch. Hassan had learned many constellations during his years here, taught by an old man who lived at the oasis, and who knew the traditional names and stories associated with each pattern of stars. But beyond the specific constellations, Hassan loved the overall effect, the sense of looking out into unimaginable vastness, into depths and distances that made his earthly concerns seem small and temporary. There was something liberating about this perspective, something that put life in context, that reminded him not to take his worries and plans too seriously. The stew was ready, and Hassan served himself a bowl, sitting outside to eat, looking up at the stars between bites. The food was simple but good, and he ate slowly, savoring it, grateful for the vegetables his garden had produced, for the water that made the garden possible, for the skills he had learned that allowed him to feed himself. After dinner, he washed his bowl and pot with water heated over the fire, then banked the coals so they would burn low through the night. The night had grown quite cool, as desert nights always did. The same lack of moisture that made the days so hot made the nights cold, the dry air unable to hold heat once the sun was gone. Hassan wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and walked away from the oasis into the desert itself. He walked carefully, watching for the snakes and scorpions that came out at night to hunt, but he was not afraid. He had learned which creatures were dangerous and which were harmless, how to move through the desert safely, how to be aware without being anxious. He walked until he was far enough from the oasis that he could no longer see the palms or his house, until he was surrounded by nothing but sand and sky and stars. He sat down on a dune and simply looked and listened and felt. The silence was profound, deeper than any silence he had known in the city. It was not merely the absence of noise, but a quality of its own, a presence rather than an absence. In this silence, Hassan could hear things normally masked by louder sounds. His own breathing, the beating of his heart, the whisper of sand moving in the slight breeze, the distant call of a night bird. These subtle sounds were amplified by the silence, made significant, worth attending to. He thought about his life, about the journey that had brought him here, about the person he had been and the person he had become. The Hassan who had left the coastal city 7 years ago had been anxious and uncertain, driven by a sense that something was wrong but unclear about what or how to fix it. He had been searching for something external, some place or circumstance that would make him feel complete. But over time, Hassan had realized that what he had been seeking was not external, but internal. The desert had not given him answers so much as it had given him space and silence and solitude in which to find his own answers. It had stripped away the distractions and obligations and expectations that had obscured his true self, leaving him face to face with who he actually was beneath all the roles and masks. And who was he? He was someone who needed simplicity, who thrived on physical work and direct engagement with the natural world. He was someone who valued solitude, who needed long stretches of quiet to feel balanced and whole. He was someone who found meaning not in accumulation or achievement, but in daily practice, in showing up and doing the work, in maintaining a life that aligned with his deepest values. This self-knowledge had been hard-won. There had been times of doubt and loneliness, times when he questioned whether he had made a terrible mistake, whether he should return to his family and his old life. The first year especially had been difficult, filled with physical challenges as he learned desert skills and emotional challenges as he confronted his own mind without the distractions he had previously relied on. But he had persisted, and gradually the difficulties had lessened. His body had adapted to the physical demands. His mind had grown quieter, less plagued by anxiety and restlessness. He had found a rhythm and routine that suited him, a way of living that felt authentic and satisfying. The night was fully dark now, the stars brilliant overhead, the sand pale in the starlight. Hassan sat in the silence and felt a deep sense of peace, a contentment that came not from having everything he wanted, but from wanting only what he had, from being fully present in his life rather than always reaching for something else. He thought about desire, about how much of his unhappiness in his old life had come from wanting things to be different than they were, wanting a different job, different relationships, different circumstances, always comparing his actual life to some imagined ideal and finding it lacking. The desert had taught him the futility of this constant wanting, had shown him that peace came from acceptance, from working with what was rather than fighting against it. This did not mean passive resignation or giving up on change and growth. Hassan had changed immensely during his years in the desert, had grown in skills and understanding and self-knowledge. But the changes had come from acceptance rather than resistance, from embracing his life as it was rather than rejecting it in favor of some fantasy of how it should be. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant, and Hassan watched it without making a wish. He had learned that wishing kept you focused on what you lacked rather than what you had. He had everything he truly needed right here, right now. Food and water and shelter, meaningful work, time for reflection, a beautiful place to live. What more could he reasonably want? He rose and began walking back toward the oasis. The palms appeared gradually, their silhouettes dark against the star-filled sky. The pool reflected the stars, and Hassan paused at its edge to look down at this mirror image of the heavens. It was as if there were stars above and below, and he was suspended between them, held in a moment that felt outside of time. Back at his house, Hassan prepared for sleep. He had learned to go to bed early in the desert, rising with the sun and sleeping not long after it set. This alignment with natural light cycles had brought improvements to his sleep he had not experienced in years. In the city, he had always stayed up late, his days extended by artificial light, his sleep often poor and unsatisfying. Here, his body followed the sun, and his sleep was deep and refreshing. He woke feeling rested, ready for the day's work, in tune with the rhythms of his environment. This was yet another way the desert had taught him about alignment, about living in harmony with natural patterns rather than fighting against them. In bed, Hassan lay on his simple mattress under a light blanket, looking up at the ceiling where shadows from his oil lamp danced. The lamp burned low, just enough light to see by, and he watched the shadows for a few minutes before blowing it out. In the darkness, he could hear the small sounds of the desert night. A gecko moving across his wall in search of insects, the distant yip of a fox, the rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. These sounds were familiar now, comforting, signs that all was well in his small corner of the world. He thought about tomorrow, the work he would do in the garden, the goats he would milk and care for, the hours he would spend in physical labor and in rest. Each day followed a similar pattern, and some might find this repetitive or boring. But Hassan had discovered that within this regularity there was endless variation, that no 2 days were exactly alike even when they followed the same basic structure. The quality of light changed daily. The wind came from different directions. The plants in his garden progressed through their growth cycles. The goats had different moods and needs. And his own internal state varied, sometimes energetic and focused, sometimes contemplative and slow. This variation within consistency was satisfying in a way that the unpredictable chaos of his old life never had been. Hassan's breathing slowed and deepened, and he felt himself drifting towards sleep. His last conscious thoughts were of gratitude, for the oasis and its water, for the desert and its lessons, for the simple life he had built, for the peace he had found. And then sleep claimed him, deep and dreamless, his body and mind at rest. The desert night continued around his sleeping form. The temperature dropped further, the cold becoming intense, though Hassan's thick adobe walls kept his house comfortable. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, their patterns changing throughout the night as the earth turned. The pool at the oasis reflected these changing patterns, a mirror to the cosmos. Small creatures of the night went about their business. Mice and lizards, insects and arachnids, each adapted to the harsh desert environment, each playing its role in the ecosystem. An owl hunted silently, its wings making no sound as it glided between the palms. A snake slithered across the sand, sensing heat signatures of potential prey. The desert was alive even in darkness, even in apparent barrenness. The hours passed in silence and stillness. The night reached its coldest point just before dawn, that hour when everything seems most still, most quiet. And then, gradually, the darkness began to thin. The eastern sky took on the faintest hint of color, not quite light but no longer complete darkness. The stars began to fade, the brightest ones lingering longest before they too were absorbed into the lightening sky. The desert sand began to emerge from darkness, its contours becoming visible, the dunes taking shape and form. A new day was approaching, bringing with it heat and light, challenge and opportunity. Hassan stirred in his sleep, some deep instinct aware of the approaching dawn. But he did not wake yet. His body knew it needed more rest, and he turned onto his side, pulling his blanket higher, sinking back into deeper sleep. As the light grew stronger, it revealed the oasis in stages. First, the tops of the palms caught the light, glowing golden against the still dark sky below. Then the pool appeared, its surface perfectly still, reflecting the changing colors above. Finally, the ground itself lightened, the sand and the adobe walls of Hassan's house taking on color and detail. A dove called, its soft cooing the first sound of the new day. Then another answered, and soon several were calling back and forth from their perches in the palms. Other birds joined in, finches and sparrows, each species with its own distinctive voice, together creating the desert dawn chorus. Hassan woke to these sounds, his eyes opening to see the soft light of early morning filtering through his small window. For a moment he lay still, appreciating the coolness that remained from the night, knowing that soon the day's heat would build. Then he rose, moving quietly in the dim light, beginning his daily routine. He stepped outside to greet the day. The air was fresh and cool, the sand still holding the night's chill. The sky was clear, promising another hot day to come, but for now the temperature was perfect, neither too cold nor too warm. Hassan took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean desert air, feeling gratitude for another day, another opportunity to live this life he had chosen. The sun appeared above the eastern horizon, its first rays reaching across the desert, transforming everything they touched. The sand glowed gold and pink, the palms cast long shadows, the pools sparkled with reflected light. Hassan watched as the oasis was transformed by the rising sun, as darkness gave way to light, as coolness began to yield to warmth. He went to the pool and washed, the water shocking in its coolness, refreshing and invigorating. Then he returned to his house to prepare his morning meal, to begin the day's work, to live another day in alignment with the desert's rhythms. in harmony with his deepest self, in peace with the life he had built in this unlikely place. The sun climbed higher, its warmth growing stronger, the day beginning in earnest. Hassan moved through his morning tasks with practiced ease, each action part of a routine he had refined over 7 years, each moment an opportunity to be present, to pay attention, to live fully in the simple reality of desert life. And the oasis held him, as it had held countless others before him, providing water and shelter and peace to those who came seeking refuge in the vast, beautiful, demanding desert.